All righty. You're good. Wow, that's loud. All right, so we get going then?
Yes.
All righty. Well, hello, good afternoon to everyone that's here, as well as you folks that are attending virtually. Just to give you a little input. So I'm Rob Mowat. I'm with HDR. I'm their zero emissions practice lead. So I run the zero emissions programs for North America for us looking at fleets, highway systems, charging networks as we go throughout the US and Canada going forward. And today we're going to spend some time talking about planning for your zero emissions conversion in the new political environment that we have and going forward as we go through with that process. There's going to be a bunch of information. I'd prefer we stop and talk as we go along through this process. If you have questions, feel free to chime in. I'd love to take any questions you have and talk about things that you're looking at, clarify any questions that you may have as we move forward. If we go through a lot of material and then you want to go back at the end 30 minutes later and go to some slide that we really talk, you may lose your question, or I may forget what I was talking about. So let's go ahead and clarify any questions you may have virtually or whatever, timing your questions. We have a mechanism for us to talk about that. So as we go forward, really kind of looking where we're at today, we'll talk about our zero emissions environment and as far as what kind of environment we're currently living in now for our zero emissions programs as we go forward. We'll talk about integrating new technology and how that really works and some things that you should look at and move those things forward. We'll talk about transition studies. We'll talk about feasibility studies and the difference between those. And then we'll get into questions and answers as we move forward. You can probably find a spot someplace to do that. Really start looking at zero emissions environment that we're in today. And it's kind of a pun, sorry, but it's one of my favorites to look at that. And really what we're talking about now is there's really three things that are driving the environment that we're looking at today as we go forward through these process. One is really regulatory. And so when we talk about regulatory, those are either laws or they could be statutes or they could be executive orders. They could be board objectives. It is some kind of decree, if you will, that says, hey, we're going to go this direction by this date, or we want to improve our environment. We want to be zero emissions by the state, or we want to move our carbon footprint, whatever the direction is that you have and the regulations that you're living by, that you have a date that you need to achieve certain things by. And the other one's societal. And those are really just kind of the things like, what is your local environment? Okay, so I live in Austin, Texas, and we are much more prone to going zero emissions than our neighbors down in San Antonio and Houston. They have a desire as well, but in my town, it's much more societal. People really want to go. There's lots of energy, lots of push in our environment to move forward through that. So the society goes there. And then you have corporate partners and citizens. So you have lots of groups that are really doing it because they feel it's the best interest of the community. It's what's best for their realm of control that they have. They really want to do. It's the right thing to do. And so they're just doing it really philanthropically to move forward on that process. And so really those are the three things you have. So we'll find clients going through zero emissions, whether it's a regulatory response, whether it's a societal response, or it's going to be a corporate citizenship or decision made by an organization. That's just the way we want to go. It's the right thing to do for us to move forward. Kind of give you a little call out there, the box in the bottom. Bloomberg puts it's one of their famous ones that we do. A lot of people look at in our industry and looking at that. And they're forecasting in the 2020 forecast was 64% of all buses would be electric buses by 2040. And that was their forecast a year ago. And I can tell you that number with the new infrastructure package is expected to be actually blow past that number as they go forward there. And there's some discussions about zero emissions vehicles and some other stuff in the large global and US investment in those products as they go forward. One of the things we see a lot, and just kind of give you a feel for the future trends that we're seeing as we go forward through this process, going to that, there's going to be a lot of new products. So in the medium and heavy duty vehicle project in the transit world, lots of new products. On the heavy duty side, the technology of the 5 big suppliers that are out there, 6 going up into 6. Those folks, they have new technology. They're in versions 4, 5, and 6 of their vehicles, of their battery packs, of their technology software, those kinds of system charging systems. Those will continue to progress and move forward as you go through that. But that medium duty, that cutaway market is really evolving. It's really has a lot going on. There's people announcing new things right now. And if you had to look at it on a scale, I'd tell you that the cutaway market, the smaller cutaway vehicles are kind of where transit buses were 4 or 5 years ago, right? It's really at that beginning, the price points are about the same, but it's going to move really, really quickly. It'll have a faster up curve than the larger vehicles because they're learning lessons from the heavy duty folks as they go forward there. So that'll come in. New players will be in that market as well. You're seeing new startup companies trying to get that market that are in that place, Workhorse, Rivian, to name a few. Those are all trying to get in that new space in that market. So it's going to be really competitive and really move forward as we go forward there. Battery energy, the batteries that they had that they're ordering today are not what you're getting in 18 to 24 months. They're advancing that quickly. You're going to continue to see that the chemistry, the density, the energy storage, those are all going to increase. And you're also going to see new materials. There's discussion about solid state batteries coming on and that increase of range. There's fluid dynamic charging with these new fluid systems coming in and out where you actually replace charged fluid, being technology and tested and experimented with today. All of these new technologies will keep coming out, new developments to go forward. So you'll see better range, better things on the battery side. Power delivery systems will continue to improve. You're going to see on the hydrogen side, we'll talk about electric and hydrogen and zero emissions today. Hydrogen side, you'll start seeing hydrogen is right now very regionalized. You will start seeing much larger regional pictures, delivery networks, expansion systems, both for delivery, new systems coming into place for on-site generation. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So there's a lot happening there is that. You're also seeing lots of cost parity coming down. So the difference between them are coming down. So if you've been around for a while, you'll remember that the electric vehicles, when they came out, the standard 40-foot transit bus was $400,000 at the time. They were in the 1.2 million, right? So they were 3 times the purchase price, and now you're seeing them in the mid 800s, right? So they're coming down already. They've dropped, and they will continue as that market goes, technology goes forward. You'll continue to see that. The return on investment numbers, if we saw the presentation this morning from St. Louis, they're already seeing a return on investment on that gap cost already, and forecasted to make the return in 7 years. So people were starting to see the movement, and they're starting to move those things forward. They go through the cost parity to do that. Adoption rates are going up as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Really start thinking about that from a standpoint of in your mentality as we'll go through this today is think about where you are today and think about pilot projects where people are taking out, I had a grant, I bought 3 or 4, and people are now going, okay, I'm not a pilot. I need to demonstrate this. And now I need to make this scale up to a much larger perspective as they go through with that. That'll continue to happen as we go through that. We think state by state, region by region, you're going to see increased regulations for this stuff. You're going to see much more zero emission stuff. A lot of it's coming through Air Quality Act funding as well for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So we're expecting more regulations to come forward with this at the state and local level. Each state is different. Each state has different, obviously, appetite for advancing that agenda, but we are seeing it as the states move forward. Obviously, increased funding, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. You're having much more availability of federal funding, some state funding. You're seeing outside partnership money, and we'll talk about that in the funding cycle a little bit, but you are seeing private money. You're seeing utilities step into the market. You're seeing hydrogen suppliers start stepping in the market about how they can help advance their products as they go forward there as well. So when I say funding, it's not just federal and state, but also third party and private money coming in. We're seeing lots of new business models, charging as a service, fueling as a service. We're seeing people come in talking about different kinds of battery packages, different kinds of who owns batteries. Do you lease batteries? Do I give them back to you? Do you build a battery energy storage system with them? So there's lots of new business models evolving around this new technology. So you have the new businesses and the new technology, and then you have these new people who are taking advantage of the new technology, creating another business on top of that. So you're seeing lots and lots of opportunities and lots of decisions to be made in the transit world that affect how you handle your day-to-day operations and how you plan to go forward with that. And then you have new technology adaptation. I'll just throw that in from a standpoint of we're seeing the electrification of vehicles in particular really being a good tie-in to autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles as they go forward. And so we were starting to see people talk about, well, I want the vehicle to come on property and then I want it to operate autonomously in my bus yard. I want it to drive itself through the bus wash. I want it to take it over here. I want to do this over here. I want these things to happen here. I want this to be connected on my smart passenger systems and all that. So we're starting to see all the technology really start to become integrated now to move forward in that process as they go forward. Really kind of look at a zero emission vehicle adoption curve and really talk about this. It's not a linear progress, right? So linear progression is just a little bit more over time. But really what we're expecting here is really going to be this exponential growth. Really kind of come through testing, and then it's just going to take off. And what you would see here now, there's a lot of discussion about where we may be on this graph as you look forward through it now. To me, I look at it, we're kind of right about the imment of disappointment. We're right around that area curve. We're starting to see lots of energy push up. And that's driven by regulations we talked before. It's talked about money, as we talked about before, and societal pressure as well. So those three factors, when you have pressure and you have money and you have a requirement to do it, that's when things really start moving. And the industry, the technology is catching up as well as moving forward there. So we're really going to see that ramp up. And where the lines cross, the guess is that lines cross is about 2040. So if you look at where we are now, if we're at 2021, down at the end, disappointment, somewhere in there just before it really starts taking off. Right where the line across is about 2040 when they think that's when that critical mass, that's when that 30%, 35% of all transit vehicles, 40% of transit vehicles are battery electric. That's when really things are really start ramping up and moving forward as they go through there. And the disruption line, just so you get a feel for there, think about the disruption line in your transit operations, multiple facets, right? So the disruption line is going to be not just everyone goes, oh, the driver and the driver training and my maintenance procedures and how do I charge and infrastructure and where do I put things in my space. It really starts talking about all of your operations that start talking about your planning department and how do you plan routes that are battery energy or hydrogen efficient? How do those systems work out? When we deal, for example, with refuse truck collection, folks, a lot of people don't pay attention to is that a lot of the refuse collection are actually designed to where they pick up their loads based upon the gravity of the hill of the routes. So they don't want to have full trucks going up hills. They want empty trucks going up hills. So when they start thinking about how they design their routes to be most efficient for fuel, that's what's going to end up happening with our planning departments as we start going through that stuff. Same thing with capital management. You're looking at huge dollar amounts going in forward, both on the vehicle and the infrastructure. So capital planning and infrastructure is going to be a big force. So every part of your operation, community outreach, getting folks, equity, diversity, inclusion, all those groups, all of them will play a role in the part. So that's part of that disruption services that you'll see all the groups of your organization be affected as you go forward. So really just kind of talk about just kind of the big elephant everyone wants to talk about right now is and I'll give you just an update because I'm not the finance guy in my group. The bipartisan infrastructure group, the way it's set up. And as it's come out of committee and we're looking forward to it now, really what you're looking at is 24,000 transit buses they want to replace under this new guise of the new act. And there's 24,000 transit buses, $2.5 billion for zero emission school buses, and then $2.5 billion for low emission or electric, lower emission school buses as well to do that. And then you see obviously things like larger charger network design for light duty vehicles or heavy duty public use vehicles as they go forward that way. I think the real key here for us is that the funding is coming. They're seeing the need for that, want to accelerate that process. But be aware that a lot of these funds, almost all the funds are not for plans. They are funds for actions or actual funds for tangible items, charging systems, right-of-way acquisition, vehicles. They're actually moving, buying tangible assets as things go forward. And a lot of it is looking at direct fleet replacements. So a lot of the folks we've talked to in one of the FTA regions, and I will say it was not your region 7, was really talking about we're done with pilots. I don't want to see any more proposals for pilots. We've piloted this stuff enough. I want to see transition plans and we want things to move forward. So there's a lot of focus on that. Everything has a climate change perspective, whether that's compliance with climate action plans or greenhouse gas emissions, that is, and sustainability of energy sources. All of that is mixed into these new plans and elements of proposal grants going forward. Everything has an equity filter now, and we should talk about equity as well. We go through that process, and this key speaker today at lunch was talking about equity. And I think one of the things that we look about when we talk to customers about equity is we really talk about and say equity is more than just everyone has an electric bus, but we really look at equity as saving the benefits of clean emissions for your entire community. And so when we're saying that is, if you take a bus yard and it has 100 buses in it and they start up in the morning and they idle diesel or diesel fuel or natural gas, there's emissions there in that neighborhood. Well, when those vehicles switch over to electric or they switch over to hydrogen, those emissions are going away. And so those neighborhoods, even if they're not riding the bus, those neighborhoods are benefiting from the greening of your fleet. And there's an equity value to your community, whether they're a rider or not, to move forward. So I think there's a lot of things to look at on the equity filter beyond just what your bus is and who rides it, but how your bus interacts with your community as you go forward. And then we talked about power infrastructure, sustainability, all of those things are going forward. I think the biggest takeaway from this slide is to really think about the trends, is to look at, and when we see that is people who have plans are moving to the front, or we believe are going to move to the front of the financing queue. Meaning that if your proposal is put in and say, this is my plan to convert my fleet, or this is my process, and here's how this money will help me implement my plan or stage of my plan, those things are being viewed or will be viewed more favorably than someone who just says, oh, I want to buy 4 buses. Obviously that has an opportunity as well, but we think people with plans, when we're hearing people say we're tired of pilot projects, I think those plans are moving people to the front of the project, to the front of the funding queue, especially on the federal side. So we'll talk about integrating new technology as we go through the funding of that and really start talking about kind of the mentality of what we go through for that. So when we go out and we deal with folks, we get tons of questions. These are the common questions we get all the time with customers about when can I do it? Does this work for me? How will it work for me? When should I adopt? Really, when is it too soon? When is it too late? And I think that's a really big question we get all the time, which is, I want to do it because I see the need. I think it's what we should be doing. I have a regulatory condition I need to meet. I want to go ahead and make my transition. Is my technology ready for my service? Will it be reliable? Is it ready for me now? That's a big question we get. And the other counterbalance, or should I wait till later? Well, they counterbalance that with the other question, which is, okay, the funding's coming now. So the point is, if I have funding now, but I'm not sure about technology, how much do I dive in? How can I dive in? Where's the safe water? Where's the date? Can I swim in this area before I go into the deep water? And those are the kind of questions that we're working through with folks all the time to go through that. Just based by not just operationally, but financially, structurally, organizationally, facility. It's got a lot of implications for that, but we get lots of questions about that. And when we get through that, we really talk about folks go, okay, the first thing is when you start playing with this stuff and looking at it is really you need to be what we consider to be fuel neutral, right? So we look at it and say, not every operation is the same, not every route is the same. Really look at what is the best solution for you, whether that be electric, CNG, renewable CNG, hydrogen, whatever that system may be for battery electric buses. You really want to look at being fuel neutral as you go forward through the process. And we always look at 3 things as well in our guiding principles, and one of which is really do the first things first, or really look at idea implementation. So our concept is, if you know where you are and you know where you want to go and you have the goals and objectives, that's how your process should work, right? And so we want you to really start there. We want you to do the first things first. Think about the research, the planning, the design for your overall system as you go forward, so that you're not stopping and starting, right? So you want to do a fleet transition. You don't want to build a quilt. And so that's an important process. You go through that. And we talk about really doing data, really. So really get data-driven decisions. So if you can remain fuel neutral, really think about where you are and where you want to go ultimately with your fleet. Think about what comes first in the research, planning, design, and then look at getting data so you're making good judgment decisions. That really leads to a successful plan as you go forward to that. This is really what any new technology, this is the S-curve of new technology development. So whether it's a laptop, cell phone, whatever it may be, an electric vehicle, a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, this is the process that goes through, right? So someone has the idea of what it is and where it needs to go for the application, and then they're going to do the research, and then they're going to plan it, then they'll design it, then they pilot it, and then they look at it, they do the analysis, they make their corrections, and then they relaunch the vehicle. And that's the technology curve that everything goes through. And electric vehicles will have the zero emission vehicles will have the exact same curve. You will go through that exact same process to go through that. And so we started talking about this with clients that were the early adopters. We said, are you experiencing this? What are you experiencing? And they're saying, no, I'm not really experiencing that. And I'll tell you that each one of these steps, by the way, builds on itself. So the research element supports the planning, and planning does the design, and the designing for the piloting. And what we've found is is that if you shortchange this, and people go, well, I wouldn't shortchange it. Well, you heard people all the time say, well, I got a grant for 4 buses. Didn't think I was going to win, but I got it. So I bought 4 buses. I put them in. Now I want to go to 8, but it doesn't really work. So they're back to figuring out how it works again. They're going back to the research stage to figure out how they go to the next step. And that's why we say beginning to end. And when we talk to people in the transit world, we said, what are you experiencing? They said, oh, we're not experiencing that. What happens is we get to our pilot test, we do it. And then when we want to do more, I kind of get stuck. I can't scale up. I don't know how to get to the next step as I go forward. What do I do next? And so in that scaling zone, as we call it, they have to read, plan, they have to go back, do more research, do more planning, and restart the process over again. And so some of the early adopters have said, oh, so does this look like your model? And they said, yeah, this is what we're doing. And some are going, but I'm on my 7th or 8th S curve as we go. It keeps restarting and restarting and restarting. And that's when we start talking, people talk about, man, I'm spending a lot of money. I spent a lot of my staff. I spent a lot of my morale of my team going through these projects as they work through this process. And when we start talking to that and you start hearing lessons, so you start hearing people talk about things, and we're hearing people talk about, oh, I bought these vehicles, but there was no space in my facility for my chargers. I didn't think they took that much space, or I knew there was a charger, but I didn't know I had switch gear, and I didn't know I needed transformers. I didn't know they're that big, or I didn't know I need this kind of space. We found people who bought the wrong chargers for what their applications are. There's a lot of things that can happen in places where they get stuck, and they get in that living lab of doing the scaling zone and just going through this process and just never ending S curves as they go forward to do that. And so I will tell you, I'll go stay on this slide 1 second. One of the things we talk about when we talk about know where you are, where you want to go, and we'll talk about it more, is we really talk about the pilot test being testing what your end solution is. Meaning, if you know that 30% of your fleet can be run by, in electric case, depot charging, but you're going to have to go to some in-route charging for the remainder of your vehicles, you can make the decision that in my pilot, I want to test on-route charging. Even though I don't have to, I want to test it because I want to go through the process of real estate acquisition. I want to work with my city on getting permitting. I want to work with getting a GC and getting design. I want my drivers to get used to how does that work. I need my planning group to figure out how much time do I have to allocate for that. I want customers to get used to it. There's a lot that can happen. And you can say, oh, well, that doesn't work for me at all. That solution is not going to work, right? But if you just do the battery, if you just do depot charging, you just do the vehicle, what you're testing is one form of technology. You're not testing your whole solution. So we really talk about the pilot testing being what they do as they go forward. Supporting this process as you go forward, really it's the same S curve, but what we do is we put a dotted lines in there. You can go through this process by yourself. You can go through this and get research and get different support at each one of these steps. So that can be a local advocacy group. You can go through a consultant group. It can be a peer transit agency. It can be a hire, bringing the town into your organization. So you could go the dotted line. You can get help and support at any one stage based upon how you want to go through that. Or you can go in the green line. You can actually program manage that out and give that to somebody else and consult with somebody to come do that for you as well. And that could be a consultant. That could be someone who comes in as energy as a service, charging as a service. That could be someone who does transitions as a service. And we're seeing models of all of that right now in the marketplace right now. There's a utility company that we're dealing with in the Southeast. There's actually program managing the whole process and saying, I will do your vehicles, I will procure your vehicles, I will do this, and you'll pay me a rate to do this, and just you let me do the whole thing. And so we're seeing all kinds of models available to transit agencies as they go forward. But just be aware that there's a whole lot of variety to do this as you move forward in this process. So really want to talk about a little bit feasibility studies and saying, okay, we talked about beginning to end and first things first, but really I'm not sure even how it works for me. And so I really want to spend a little bit of time with, there's some confusion at times between a feasibility study and a transition plan. Sometimes they get confused because they're doing the both at the same time, like they know they're going to transition. So we're just going to figure out what's the best way to go forward. And some people just do a feasibility just to see if it's even what we want to do right now, or should I wait 5 more years? I want to test the water. Today's technology, what do we know? What do we want to do? How do I want to go forward? So we really look at the feasibility stuff, and really what that is where's the technology now? Where is it going to go? What's needed for my routes as I go forward? What's the impacts on my organization? Is my organization ready for this? Do they have the inertia to carry this forward? You know, if I start this transition plan, are my people going to say, you know what, my planning department likes it, my maintenance department doesn't. Also, I won't be, it's going to really be a hard push uphill for these folks. Maybe we need to get a little more time. We've heard horror stories in other places. I can't get my group to move forward there. What are the facility requirements? That's a big request for now. We get a lot too, which is, hey, I'm going to build a new facility in 5 years. So I don't want to transition now and then have to move all that infrastructure to my new facility. So what if I wait 5 years? What will it look like then? What will I need at that new facility as I move forward? How much space for charging? How many parking spaces? How should it be configured? How do I work with my utility? So that's a real feasibility study of what do I need? How does it work? And where is every technologies that go forward through there? And we'll spend time looking at feasibility studies. And then the transition is after you've done the feasibility study, you've selected a solution. You think you know what your plan is, and to think about your plan as people have told me many times, a lot of times it's not the plan, it's the planning. And that's really a key thing to think about here about how you get this process moving forward. It's how you make a transition to go forward. And we'll talk about the transition plans as we go forward here, but it's really about, okay, I've picked my technology or I've picked my solution that I want to get forward with. Now, how does that impact my organization, both with capital items, operational feasibility, driver study, mechanic training, mechanic workforce, collective bargaining agreements, all the things that come into play as you're going through that. As well as your energy supplier, whether that be however you decide to get your energy to move the vehicles going forward. Your workforce planning, equity in your community, again, is an important piece of how those plans are put together to make sure that everyone in your community is benefiting from your transition equally as you go forward. So I always talk about it's a simple way of is a sword and a shield. And so what I always say about this is the feasibility really functions as a shield in the way that you now know you have political responsibilities, you have social responsibilities in your group, you have advocacy groups that want you to do something. The feasibility study is your shield in the sense that you now can go out and really look at what's available and how those things work for you. And now when you get questions and challenges or people look for your direction, you're able to say, wait a minute, we appreciate your feedback and your input. Here's what we've done. We've done all of these things to move our things forward. We've looked at these technologies where they are today and where they move forward. We figured out what the financial impacts are. We looked at what the greenhouse gas reduction emissions could be during those processes. We've done all those things. We know how these things work in our current day-to-day operations. And so you have a way of demonstrating and covering what actions you've done and where you are in the process and what decisions you've made, other than just going, I don't think it works for me, or, oh, it will work for me. You really know how it is, and you have information to support your decisions as you go forward in that process. And then the sword for me is really the transition plan of now that you've made that decision, you know where to move forward, and you've decided to move forward. That's the other question. If you decide to move forward with it and how you go into that, your sword is really the ability to say, this is the plan. And now you're able to go forward, and now you can go to your stakeholders externally and internally and say, okay, if this is the plan and this is the directive and this is the way we want to go, here's what I need. I need this much money to do this. I need planning to make these kind of decisions. I need our outside stakeholders to be able to step up and help us here and there. So we got a really good story again about how supportive the local energy utility was here with St. Louis, with Bi-State, and how they put in their charging system for our ticks today on their main line. Well, and who installed it, and how long did it take, and who paid for what? Those are all really important decisions to be made as you go through that process. But when you have it and you can say, look, great, we want to go to zero emissions. That is a $47 million price tag. That is a $250 million price tag. And here's when I will need that money over the next 12 years. And in what increments and what chunks. And here's what I need from the utility. Here's what I need from my hydrogen supplier. Here's what I need from when we go to a collective bargaining agreement. We need to think about making these changes. There's a lot to be done with the organizations we talked about before, but that's really what the sword is. That's where you can say, this is what needs to happen, and here's how I need to get this plan to take place. So originally they started talking about this early on. The early adopters was, well, I'll get some money and I'll buy a fueling source, whether that be hydrogen or electric, and I'll buy some vehicles. And I'm in the electric vehicle business. I'm in the zero emissions game. Let's go, ready to happen. And they quickly found out, and as you'll talk to any of the early folks, there's a lot of things to consider they didn't think about. Once they got them, they try to figure all the pieces out later, and you'll see people going backwards down the S curve to redo research and planning and design. And they really started looking at, wow, where are my operational feasibility really work? I can use them on these two routes, but where else can I use them? What are the operating impacts to my drivers? What are they to my dispatch offices? What are they on my maintenance team? What's the requirements for my infrastructure, both for how much energy needs to be delivered, but space and configuration and charging, and how my service crew works at night, how they park and charge vehicles and do the cleaning. How much energy do I need both to store in tanks or bring on site with through the utility? and how does that get here, and what all the capital costs are, operating costs, operating savings. There's a lot of pieces to that puzzle that you have to start thinking about as you go through that. And really then that transition plan is putting all those pieces together. So now you have your plan, you've got your map, you're able to lay out where it all goes and where all the pieces go and what you're needed. And this is where you can really strategically utilize and interact with your stakeholders, right? So you hear lots of discussion about reach out, talk to your stakeholders, move forward. But what am I talking about? What do I want to hear about that, right? So when we talk about that a lot, especially for the utility folks, because there's a lot of discussion about, oh, well, I talk to utilities and they focus on just getting rates and tariffs, power demand, peak charges, subscription rates. That's a huge piece. And we don't want to negate that. But you also have to talk about power upgrades and who pays for that, who pays for the substation. Will you go all the way to this? Will you go all the way to my charger? Will you pay for that? Will you put that in there? I need a second source of power, because what happens if my power goes out in a storm? I need a second source of energy. Can I get a second feed of redundant power? Will you pay for that? Is there a cost place for that? So when you start playing all these variables together with stakeholders, if you know the plan, when you go to negotiate with them, you can talk about rates and infrastructure and support and response times and categorization of your delivery systems. You can do a lot of those things. So it's more than just, hey, can you please help me out? It's a, hey, I need this, where can that go? And you can really maneuver within the system. When we start talking about the organization itself, we really start looking at change management of the organization. And I mentioned that before. It really is new technology, right? So imagine having your whole office set up the way it is right now on a Windows-based system, and you throw it out and just launch a whole new platform. And everyone has to learn how spreadsheets work, how Word documents are developed. Everything is different. And that's what happens. It's a brand new technology you're really putting into the organization as you move forward through there. And that's going to have an impact on the service. So when I talk about service, this is the driver, bus going out, turn left, turn right. How does it affect the driver, the dispatch, radio control? How does that affect that and the planning of those operations that go forward? And then it obviously has a big impact on your maintenance department from the standpoint of how does your maintenance department function for servicing vehicles at night, regular maintenance, ongoing repairs, going forward through those kind of processes. And then again, as we talked about earlier, just organizational readiness. How is my organization ready to move forward? Is it have a mindset it's ready to go, it's ready to happen? Or is it, by the way, we're stretched so thin in doing what we are today, how are my people going to have more time to do this? Because people don't stop running day-to-day service. So how do they take on these new challenges? How do they do these new pieces of work to go forward? How do I get help to get that done as we go through that? And really, it's just a matter of look at all the impacts of your organization, both in manpower and planning. And one of the things we've really started to hear a lot from early adopters is they're having a lot of fatigue from their employees because they're taking on double responsibilities. They're running their day-to-day service and they're adapting to this new technology. And it goes and it stops and it goes and it stops. And that has a lot of morale issue for folks. So people are really talking about, we really need to get this thing moving on and have somebody responsible to do this as we go forward. And the other part of that slide I'll mention is tolerance. Figure out where your tolerance is of your organization from a standpoint of there are organizations out there going, I will not do in-route charging. I have no interest in it. Well, that eliminates one of your big solutions. So now we have to find other solutions where to do it. Or organizations will say, you know what, I will allow one vehicle swap per route. I'll allow that. Or I'll do a fleet replacement ratio. Instead of 1-to-1, I'll do 1.25. Okay, well, now when you start knowing what your tolerance levels are, you can start working backwards and start eliminating options that don't make sense to you, right? Because the options are literally limitless to try and find a solution for you that works. But you have to kind of figure out what your tolerance is. And to be honest, we find almost every customer is unique in what their tolerance is. Oh, I'd like to do that, but my union agreement won't let me do this. Oh, I'd like to do that, but I have a limitation on the space of my facility. Well, I like to do that, but oh, my city doesn't like us doing construction projects in the downtown area. So all those things factor into what tolerance is and what your political environment is and how those things work forward. But they're important to know when you're doing your feasibility study of really what's really practical that you can really pull off as you move through this process. Look at energy sources. So when we look at zero emissions, I'm focusing on hydrogen electric today. Really look at the availability of it, meaning what is it? How much is it? What is your utility? What's their capacity? How much can they take on? It's one thing to hook up 2 or 3 chargers. Okay, I'm going to put a megawatt of power right here to run my vehicles. All right, it's fine. What happens when you walk in and say, you know what, I think I need 23 megs of power? Well, you might become one of their biggest users of power. And so that's a major issue for them. And they may go, oh, I can do that, but it's going to take me 3 to 4 years to build those subsystems and get permitting and construction. Well, if you're like, well, I got buses coming in 2 years. Well, it's going to take me 4 years to get you power. Well, that's a big problem. So you start looking at fuel availability. You look at fuel sources that are available to you. We talked about hydrogen a minute ago, whether it's regionalized, where it's made, how is it made, who makes it, how does it get different places that they go? And then we look at price stability. So you can go backwards and forwards with this debate to go through that process. So there's the concept of the cost of energy and how you can keep the cost of energy down, whether that cost will drop or not is up for debate. And the same thing is say with hydrogen too. So hydrogen is very expensive. It's more expensive, I should say now, but everyone says, oh, with a lot more people using it, the prices will fall. Okay, maybe. But we have to look at that and really what's the feasibility of that. And it could be regionally driven as well. Because if you're in a city that has a site nearby that generates hydrogen, well, your prices are going to be cheaper than if I live 400 to 500 miles away and have to truck it in every day, right? So those are different things as you go through that. And then look at potential investments for transition. So potential investments can be groups coming in, again, doing charging as a service. We'll do this for you. We'll provide it for you. We'll operate it. We'll maintain it for you. If you're a transit system, maybe my local school district is interested in transitioning, but they want to go electric. So I'll go electric with them, or they want to go hydrogen, I'll go with them. My local refuse collection trucks may be interested in doing that. Maybe we'll partnership in that as well. So you can save on some infrastructure costs maybe as you go forward there as well. Part of the feasibility is really technology review. And really what we're looking at is where is it today and where is it going? And I can tell you that we meet almost with all of the OEMs every 4 to 5 months. And I can tell you that every 4 to 5 months, they have a completely new thing. What they talk about, they're launching, they got another plan, more sustainability. You've talked to them every time. If you go out here, they'll go, oh, I got a new battery pack coming. All of it's great. It's all an advancement, but it's all really going forward as they go through there. We look at really where they are on the adoption curve, and you can see the top curve there really is talking about the CNG had that maturity at lunch. If you heard the keynote speaker, he talked about it, and I was an operator of the transit system at that time. So I remember the pains of, oh, well, we re-sleeved engines and we put CNG and we burned them all up and that wasn't working. And it was like, CNG is never going to work. And all these compression stations, this is awful. And now it's like we do it in our sleep and it works great. Well, CNG went through that process and it's been done. And now we've got battery electric buses there on the green line, and that's going forward moving now, and it's a little bit ahead. And now we have fuel cell electric buses that are right behind that, and they're going through the same curve, right? So you have the S curves, they keep showing up wherever we look, but they're just a little bit behind, but they're coming along as well. So all offer different solutions as they go forward through there. But the different things, power availability, we talked about there, different business models that are available for you to move forward there. And I'll give you just a quick one. One of our clients with Northern Arizona University really was focused on greenhouse gas. And that was their number one thing, greenhouse gas emissions reductions. That was their driver. It's really what they want to do with the university system there. So we laid out all of those different things, where the technologies were, greenhouse gas emissions, and they made a selection on the direction they wanted to go. But a lot of their decision was based solely on where the state of the technology was today and where they thought it would go in the future. And then just kind of once you kind of know where the technology is, look at it as it is applied to your service. Certain services lend themselves differently and than other energy sources, right? So by the nature of the service and how they're designed and how you're using stuff, if it's a planned, a spoken wheel, it's all, Monday through Friday. We don't have a lot of commuter runs. We have a huge commuter service. Each one functions differently. You can look at how those emissions reductions take place. You can look at the technology timelines, your different risk assessments that you have going forward, and your technology comparisons or mixes. So our client here in Monterey St. Louis Transit actually is in the process of making that decision, but is leaning towards actually 2 solutions. They have multiple garages. They have almost four garages now. They're building their 4th. They're looking at a mix of battery electric on one part of the peninsula where it makes sense. On the other side, their other garage operates longer, different runs, and they're looking at doing hydrogen on the other side. So you may see that even in your own operation, virtual garage, you may have multiple solutions if you choose to do that. That was within their organizational tolerance. They were happy to do that or look at it. Other people say, I'm not taking on 2 new technologies at the same time. And they actually haven't figured out the timing of that either, but it is a process that we're going through the technical review as they do that. Another thing looking at real quick is operations modeling. So feasibility, there's lots of going on about operational modeling. This is really trying to figure out, how does a vehicle work? How does it consume energy in your day-to-day service and operations? And just for simplification for today, there's really kind of 2 models. You can do a math modeling, or you can actually do a physics-based modeling of your operations. And so math modeling is fine. It's energy agnostic, obviously. It's relatively inexpensive. It's very quick. It's pretty simple. And it gets you in the neighborhood, gets you close. All right. So it can actually take you in the town and say, okay, you're in the Northwest quadrant. That's where you are. So it does some things there. We do some math modeling as well. But they also do physics simulations, which are a little more costly, take a little more time to do. But they're able to adapt to different scenarios much cleaner to do that. And you can actually do some pretty progressive analysis that each step as you go through that, oh, play with this, change this charger out, change this routing out. You can do some pretty good analysis going forward. So math modeling is kind of concepts of your average vehicle goes this far per day, average kilowatts per mile, kilowatts per day. Here's your energy demand for your depot, those kinds of things. And the physics space gets pretty detailed going to that. And I'll show you a number of things just of examples of outputs and things you can look at when you start looking at getting data for your data-driven decisions to go through that. So just as a general viewpoint of this, if you start on the left side of the dark blue dots, that's really your specifics of your information. That's your vehicle data that you want to use, the vehicle profile, how big, how heavy, what's the wheelbase, what kind of powertrain is it, friction. There's literally 4 or 5 categories. Each category has 10 or 11 different criteria in it for the vehicle specifications. And then route details, whether you're pulling GTFS data offline or you're doing GPS telematics. So kind of where the vehicle is, the path, stops and starts, those things. And then the orange there are the input models. So that's where you're taking all the input and you're starting to run through your processing, right? So you're going to start applying elevation mapping and things so you can know when these things go up and when these go down, when they stop, when they start, make the right turns, left-hand turns, all those kinds of things. Then you can run it through a simulator to say, okay, now that I know the vehicle and the stops, the starts, I have a profile of the routing, stopping and starting. Let's look at it and say, okay, how much energy are we going to use to go through that? And then you could take that and apply it to your schedule to figure those things out. And then you can have the outputs in the blue, which are really going to start talking about energy consumption per route, per vehicle, per garage, per depot, per vehicles going through one transfer center. If you want going through that, what's the feasibility of in-route charging? What are the benefits? How does it work? Does it really do anything for us? And if it does, how much? Going through that. What are my facility charging requirements? How much power, how many chargers, how much space is needed, going through those things, power, location, and number. And then the bottom one is just operational impacts of hours, miles, fleet replacement ratios, if any, vehicle swaps may need, greenhouse gas emissions going forward. And then ultimately that feeds into some kind of financial model to say, okay, based upon these scenarios and how these things are happening, what is this really going to cost us? And then at what stage to go through that. So this is one of the outputs that you look at, which is a block from one of our clients. And really what you have here is the left-hand side are all the block numbers, right? So these are the driver block numbers as they go out. On the left-hand side, the bottom column is the time of the day. So each one of those lines is a vehicle. It is a bus in service. And so what this is showing is in this modeling, they wanted to look at depot charging, some en route charging, and they would accept some vehicle swaps if they would need to be. So if you see the top 2 lines, those are buses that are green. The bus that's green is in high power state of charge for its battery, going to yellow and then red. And so what happens is that that's the vehicle as it progresses today. And then that block at the top is over. So it's green, it goes yellow, it goes red. And that's the assigned service block as it is today. And it goes out of block. Well, if you go down 3, the third column there, that block right there, you can tell it's on route charging because it's green, it goes yellow, and it goes back to green. And then goes yellow back to green, yellow to green. So that vehicle actually has access to a charger. If they put a charger at the depot, which was what their request was at one of their transfer centers downtown, how many blocks could use it? And so that's what happens. That vehicle goes there. But the fourth one down goes green, green, and then has a blue square. Well, that's where that route doesn't go through the downtown terminal, doesn't get access to an in-route charger. So that vehicle has to be swapped out. So that's more non-revenue hours and miles. It's an extra vehicle to go into that. And so you can kind of map out their whole operation. This was one of their smaller garages for one day. And it's just kind of looking at, okay, if you put a charger here, really, where does this work? How many? So when you went through this, there's only 4 routes that require a swap from this one garage, but you could see how many vehicles on those routes go out and go green, yellow, and then back to green. Those are all vehicles that are using that on-route charging at that one location as they go forward to that process. So you can see a lot when you start mapping out vehicles on routes and their blocks. Other data you're going to want to look at for outputs. If you look at the top hand square, you can start seeing the top left is ICE or internal combustion engine vehicle, and that's the scheduled number of revenue hours and miles, non-revenue hours and miles, and PVR is peak vehicle requirements. So that's how many vehicles are you required to use in a day to run this service. And that's their current operating statistics in that top left-hand box. And the right-hand box, this is what happens if they switch to all electric. Okay, so if they switch to all electric using the scenario we just showed you a little bit ago, that shows you the increase in non-revenue hours and miles. So you can see how the non-revenue hours and miles have doubled in some cases, and they've gone up. And to run their service the way they were looking at it in for the various routes for this one garage, depot only charging, they needed 55 vehicles to run what they currently run for 37 vehicles, right? So depot only charging doesn't work. I mean, it works, but feasibly, you're doubling your number of non-revenue hours and miles, and you're almost doubling the size of your fleet. So is it feasible? Yes. Is it practical? It is not, right? So you can now see that solution doesn't work. And that's what the different kinds of modeling things can do for you as you go through there. And the bottom was just a depiction showing you that the blue is the baseline. That's what you're currently operating in service. And then the orange, the green, and the yellow shows the percent of increases of each one of those things as you go forward, if they did this scenario, right? So what we do is go this say, here's what your service looks like at depot only charging. Here's what your service looks like with depot and route charging. Here's what it looks like in different parameters. You go through it, but that's what the physics-based modeling allows you to do. Lots more extrapolations and scenarios to play with of really what's feasible as you go forward here. Just other stuff here, just kind of looking at, you can figure out what you're looking at as far as the average energy consumption, how much of that energy you're using is moving the vehicle and how much of it is heating or cooling the vehicle. As they go forward through that, it tells you how many blocks that are out there. So if a bus goes out there all day for 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, how many vehicles does it go? How many times does it have to be cut or broken up if it's on route charging or depot charging as it goes through that? And then the bottom right one just kind of shows that you can also look at it from the standpoint of someone will say, well, 35% of your fleet can do depot only charging. Well, that may not be 35% of your service. So what we were showing in that bottom right wheel chart is just that the feasibility of what's available based upon depot charging is a much higher percentage. But when you look at it, but when you look at the percent of the actual services operated every day, it's actually much less. It's actually picking up lots of trippers, lots of small service, but the core service is still out there running as they go through those things. And so this just looks at, the other one is the other benefit of doing some physics-based is that you can look at on route charging from the standpoint of how effective is it and how many do you need. So what you're seeing here is a client here that's looking at on route charging, and each one of those columns above is actually an on route location for chargers. And it shows, the top one shows if you put one or two there, how many are needed. And so if you put one there, the one charger can use majority of the charge. And then the orange is the second charger, and how much energy it provides is how much required. So you can see literally someone say, oh, I'll do on route charging, but how many do I need? You can say, well, if you went on the field trip today, you saw that they needed 2, but they bought 3 because they wanted some resiliency in the service. So this allows you to do the same thing. The one on the right-hand side, you can see, say, for example, take the red or the orange columns there. You can see that the top column, the orange, one charger really provides the vast majority of the charging. And the second one does a little bit of charging. So if you bought 2 chargers just to get by that, you're actually building in some resiliency in your system. So if one goes down, you've got some availability of the other to operate and pick up the slack. They're both not maxed out for operation as you go forward through that process. So it allows you to do a different analysis as you go through those things. And then to not get too technical, but one thing that comes up all the time is really looking at charging profiles and when energy is used and drawn and how much is drawn. And so this is just some of the energy breakdown that we do by location or by profile. And so when you see here, the blue graph just shows when power is drawn, and then the red graph shows when vehicles are in, just so you can see, okay, when are vehicles coming in a draft? Because you'll be surprised how transit operations will look at and say, well, right now when a vehicle comes back, I hit it with diesel, I fill it up with diesel and I park it. So it comes back, I touch it once, I fuel it, I wash it, and I park it. Well, if you wash it and then plug it in and start charging right away without managing charging, you're going to pay a lot more money because of the demand time and when that vehicle comes back. So what we're really trying to look at is how can we spread that charging out so we can lower the peak demand. So you don't bring as much infrastructure, you don't need as much space, and you don't pay as much money on your cost to do that. So that's a really important thing to figure out. It's one thing to say, okay, here's how much we think you might use. It's another one to say, here's how much you're going to use and when you're going to use it and where you need it. And here's how you can really look at managed charging versus unmanaged charging. And we'll go through some scenarios with that. So when you look at that, this is a rate page from California from PG&E. And you can see they've got subscription systems that you can buy into subscription service. They've got peak, off peak. They've got weekday, weekends, summer rates, winter rates. So if you look at it and say, oh, here's how much I think I'm going to buy, and I don't know when I'm going to charge whatever, you can be drastically off. And so this client of ours really did a math calculation, said, I think this is what it's going to cost us. They said, do you think it's going to be different? So we said, well, let's really do an analysis, figure out when you can charge, what you should charge, and how you can multiplex the system out. And so we said, we went build this column and built through all the different charging. This is 2 different bases, and the demand fees, all the different things that they have in there. And we went unlimited, managed, and managed by day. So unlimited was the bus comes back, I plug it in, I charge, and I'm done. And if we went through all that, they'd pay about $6 million a year, $6.6 million a year in energy costs. And we said, well, but if you balance it out, because you don't need the vehicles to be charged in 10 minutes, you can charge them for 3 or 4 hours before they have to go out the next day. And you could balance and drop that peak demand load and everything else. And you really manage your charging just by the way you do it, regardless of even getting into software at this point, just being smart about how you do it. Their actual costs go to 1.5 million, right? So it's almost a $5 million savings just by doing it and knowing when you want to charge and how you want to charge, right? So it was a huge thing. And in fact, because we're able to multiplex their charging units instead of going bus charger per bus, we saved them almost $12 million in infrastructure as well. So really, it's important to figure out when you're going to be charged, when you're available to charge, and when you should be charging as you go forward through those systems. And then ultimately, you'll see right here, when you roll all those things up between the demand fees, the energy fees, and the metered rates, here's the difference in cost right there is a difference of $5 million a year as they go through that between the different rates and scenarios that those available to them as they went forward. Talk about hydrogen real quick, just to give equal time here going forward through this. This is just one of those things. A lot of people are looking at hydrogen right now. It's the new shiny bauble, as you will. Going forward through that, it solves some of the range, a lot of the range issues of electric vehicles, battery energy storage systems for depot-only charging. So when the hydrogen supplies change here, this is what came through one of our suppliers for them. And this is really kind of the standard model they're looking at for supply, and really looking at the left side is the number of miles that hydrogen is supplied at. So the distance it travels from where it is made to where it ends up for you to use it. And then the bottom is how much you need in a day. And so based upon that, you can see the various things. So if it's in blue, if it's under 3,000 kilograms and under basically 400 miles, you can use gaseous truck is probably going to be enough for you, because one truck's about 24 to 2,500 kg per truck. So you can get a truck a day and it'll pretty much work as you go forward through that. The green is where you get into from that 35 to 5,000 kg per day. And that's about a 75 bus operation to 85 buses a day. So that's how about 2,000 kg is about, roughly speaking, is about 75 buses a day in usage is what we've seen through modeling studies. And then you look at the different distances out there. So that's where that comes in. That's in liquid. So liquid trucks will bring in almost 7,000 kg a time. So you need one delivery a day. That's where you can get through that for the different mileage, where the economies of scale come in. And then the red side's when you start getting about on-site generation. And once you get over that 5,000 kg, what's on-site generation versus truck and tank, what makes the economic sense to make it yourself. This is just economics. It has nothing to do with greenhouse gas emissions, because there's a big difference between greenhouse gas emissions being commercially made currently and through steam, or whether you do it on site through electrolysis. So just kind of give you a feel for this. So you've got different truck and tank scenarios for this. So you've got gaseous hydrogen air where the dust comes in, gets compressed, goes into your storage tank, out of there into your balance system, dispense the vehicle, and you're on the road. And then liquid, just the same thing, but you've got some other stuff where you actually have to liquefy stuff, and then you have to take it actually liquefies, then you got to take it out of it, compress it to go into the vehicles, because it can't take the liquid form into vehicles. Big difference here is the gaseous form is space. So to keep the space down for storage, you have to really compress it. So you can be up around 10,000 PSI, or I think it's like 5.2 or 4.2 bar, if you will. And then in liquid hydrogen, it's more complex with liquid in its cold storage, but the storage space is much smaller than you have today. So just kind of give you another sense for generation. If you want to do generation, so for transit operations, we're looking at electrolyzers going forward through there, and then going through that process that you saw on the other slide of just where it came in. So it's really, once you get into the H2O storage, it's the same, whether you truck and tank or the other side. It's really just the generation piece of what goes into it to get through there, through the vaporizers and so forth, before it goes into the dispensing mode, before it comes out the other side to do that. One of the things to think about, and you start talking about electrolyzers and stuff, is think about external factors through that. I got a better slide for you here. So the external electrolyzers here, think about energy requirements. So people go, oh, well, I'll go to that. Well, some of these electrolyzers you can be pulling in. So if I said, oh, you might go to depot charging, you're going to need 9 or 10 megawatts for your depot charging. Well, an electrolyzer to run that same operation is going to need about 8 megawatts. So be aware that you're still going to bring in a lot of power to your operation, to your facility. To do that, as you go through that, so there's a ratio looking at kilowatts per the kilowatts of energy needed to produce kgs of hydrogen. And there's also a large amount of water that can be used on electrolyzers that go into that. And how do you have access to water? What's your water cost and those kinds of things? And then you also have some wastewater you have to deal with as it comes out as well. So it's not just so simple as, oh, we'll do that. There are factors that go into that beyond the other side. And then ultimately, if you have multi depots or mixed depots, how do you do that? You're going to generate at each site and then truck and tank? Are you going to get in the trucking business to move stuff around? You're going to bring all your vehicles to one site to do that. It's going to be a centralized site. So there's a lot of different factors to go through, because you can end up with a lot of redundancy of infrastructure as you go forward through multiple sites. And really start talking about emissions here. Trying to get a good feel for the difference in emissions reductions here. And we really look at it in two major ways, one of which is the tailpipe emissions as you go forward, obviously. And the other one we look at is generation to wheel and not generation to well. So it's supposed to be well to wheel, generation to well to wheel. And so that's really what the cost is of greenhouse gas and what those emissions are as you go forward. So you can see the top chart here is a combination for a client where we're really comparing the greenhouse gas for battery electric bus for diesel on a well or generation to wheel basis based upon how the power is created by the utility. And you can get the comparison of what those were there for their fleet. And then you can get the other ones are when you start getting into NOx and different particulates, how those two compare between the two going forward through there. And then the bottom part is just showing you the emissions that come off of diesel. The emissions as they come off of regeneration of steam generation of hydrogen based upon what source it is, whether it be there's diesel in yellow, and then you have gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and green hydrogen based upon how it's assembled there. So the only thing we talk about that is we can do the comparison and you can get all those kinds of things, but then you also have to think about what is the future emission standards from the standpoint of looking at, okay, I've got all this done. What happens if tomorrow they go back and they change their emission standards for hydrogen? Well, now you're back into the emissions reductions game again as we go forward there. So I'll move through this pretty quickly because I think I'm talking you guys out of time here. Solar analysis, we go through this, is going to see that we can really look at use top cases, a rooftop and canopies, and look at various cost configurations here to do this. The key is just to think about solar as everyone goes, oh, I'll put solar up and I'll power my vehicles. Just be aware that this is the typical client for what we did for them. And this is 3 days. So this is the cycle of what the solar generation would be over a 3-day period and the time that they get. So it's 3 consecutive days of when the power comes in. But then when we layer on top of this, well, this is when your vehicles are at the depot to be charged. The power is being generated, not when the vehicles are charged. So that means I have to save that energy to go into those vehicles when they come back and they're ready to be charged. So then we said, okay, what happens there? Well, you know what? There's a building at the same time that you're powering, and actually the power profile and the solar tie out pretty well. So we can put solar panels in, but you might want to just power your facility and not worry about the vehicles to do those as you go forward. And then you can put in there where your solar panel distributions are, and it's probably too hard to explain on the phone for you for there, but it has the peaks of what you'd be buying in the red grid as you go forward there. But really what to get to is to match those two, then you start talking about battery energy storage systems to do that. And the battery energy storage systems real quick, value to that is you can do some peak shaving opportunities for there. Can do some power redundancy in case you have power failures or to survive a little bit of time. You can also use your vehicles as a battery energy storage system. If you want to use that for a vehicle to grid, to put that back in there to store some and reprogram back. And then there's also the capacity. There is a no market now where if you are replacing the batteries on your vehicles at year 4, 5, and 6, they'll take the old batteries, make some modifications to them. There's an industry doing that now, and then turn those into your battery energy storage banks. So don't go buy a bank now, survive for 4 or 5 years, then take the batteries you already paid for and turn those into your battery energy storage system later to do that. We have found at this point, because of the cost of battery energy storage systems, in a transit application, we're actually finding if you really manage your charging well and you use the software correctly and work with the different providers and OEMs to do that, you actually get the same savings as a battery energy storage system. You don't really need one yet. They do start paying for themselves right away that way. So transition planning. Going through this real quick, and I will hit this really quickly. Sorry, it's taking me long. Biggest thing here is think about your transition plan in phases. So your vehicles are 12 to 10 year asset if you're replacing them in that cycle. So you're not going to replace all your vehicles tomorrow. You're going to take time. So you're going to go through 3 phases of any transition. And our basically phase 1 is do the easy stuff. The easy stuff based on today's technology, it can be done. How many can be done there? That's phase 1. Phase 2 is stuff that takes minor adjustments. It's not the low hanging fruit. It can be done, but you're going to have to make some structural changes to make that happen. And phase 3 are the really hard ones. That means the technology doesn't really work for what you're doing for a percentage of your service. And we really need to do those. And we're going to do those last. And then the red line allows you for the technology advancement. So that says, if I wait out 10 to 12 years, I'm going to let technology advance. We talked already about how technology is changing all the time. Each one of these phases can be 2, 3, 4 years based upon what your vehicle replacement schedule is within your fleet. So you can really set your replacement and go, okay, phase 1, I can do 50 of my vehicles can fit into phase 1, and I'm only going to replace 50 vehicles over the next 3 to 4 years. Well, you could be in phase 1 for 3 to 4 years. Now, you know, phase 2 is going to take either better technology or a little bit of adjustment to your solution. Now you've got 3 to 4 years to plan for that. So that if that's in-route charging, more technology-based, better performance, whatever it is, now you can plan for that. Okay, phase 2, how long is that going to last? That might last 3 to 4 more years. Now you're out 7 to 8 years before you get to the hard stuff, right? So don't think of it, I have to have it today. Just think about it has to be, I have to have a plan for all of it, but I have to go through phases as I get there over time. So this is just when we talk about that fleet replacement. This is one of our customers, again, it's got a small system they're looking at changing out right now. And they've already made a decision that we're going to go battery electric. And this is their current fleet that is currently diesel. And this is their replacement schedule. So you can see that they have a really inopportune time for their fleet to be replaced in 2027. But this is their current schedule that they went out and got. And we said, okay, well, based upon what you want to do, this is when your vehicles can come in, and this is when you're going to need to buy some chargers that go with it. So we're able to space this out with them and say, okay, this is the way the solution they wanted to do it. They only wanted to go depot charging. They knew it required more vehicles. That's what they were okay with. Their fleet wasn't so big, it was that unfeasible. And so we said, okay, so the bars with the lines are going to be additional vehicles we had to add to their fleet. And we said, here's where they can be added as you go forward based on what you want to do. Now, and then when we said with chargers, so we said, well, all these buses in 2027 are going to be a problem for you to get funding to pay for all those in 1 year. So we said, well, let's talk about knocking that down to a feasible level, and we'll spread those out to other years. Now, one of the things that we did here is they didn't ask us to move any vehicles early for replacement, or they didn't want to move anything into 25, 26 at the time. But one of our comments then is that the vehicles that have the patterning in the blue with they are new fleet vehicles, right? So we have to think about your spare ratios of 20% in that the number of vehicles to operate the service is now larger. So therefore your spare fleet can be larger. That makes sense, right? So it's the number of vehicles required to operate the service in a day. And so if the number of vehicles required off the day now is 50, and it's going to be 65 with battery buses, your 20% spare ratio is off the 60, not the 50. So we're saying you can buy some of those vehicles early. If you can get funding in 2025 and 26, you can buy vehicles earlier and expand your fleet without replacing vehicles. If that makes sense, to go through that. So last thing to kind of go through for capital, and hopefully you guys have some questions we go through that. Capital planning, we just really list. The key here is we talked about before, federal money, state money, and private money. And so you obviously have federal money, you know the story there, you know your state money. Private money can be Electrify America, VW money. It can be lease agreements. We've seen lots of private partnerships for people saying, hey, I'll give you land, or my utility will pony up some stuff, working with school buses going forward through there. But you can really capital plan going through your process, but look at that third category. Traditionally hasn't really been available for diesel buses, right? This has just not been there, but it is now available in this new technology because you have so many other players that want to get into this market and be part of this technology. So that is, especially with vehicles charging or fueling as a service coming up, that's going to be a big partnership as we go through there. Again, organizational changes, think about change management and really work about change management practices of implementing new technology. Don't think about it like I bought new buses. Think about I'm putting new technology into my operation, and how do I get my folks trained and prepared to do that? And how does it affect operations, maintenance, finance, planning, and procurement? Think about your stakeholder engagement plans, your local communities, your local neighborhoods, your utilities. You've got a lot local business districts, all those kinds of things that you look at before. There are places that they didn't want vehicles before because they were loud and noisy, and now they're quiet. So maybe that opens up different opportunities as well. Think about new policies and procedures that need to be adjusted about how you maintain vehicles, where they come in, new training that needs to go into place for folks in the operations side, because there'll be new things for them to think about. Before it was vehicles in the go line ready to go. Well, now they got to think about state of charge issues and what vehicles and how they get assigned, and when are vehicles coming and going during the day, and drivers coming and going during the day, maintenance practices for ongoing maintenance moving forward. And also we talk about first responders training. When vehicles break down and there's an issue on the road, fire and police showing up to a vehicle with hydrogen on it or high power batteries need to be trained on how to interact with those vehicles, right? They need to know what to do with those vehicles. So we always talk about get the first responders trained on emergency procedures and the conditions of the vehicle so they know what's going on when they need to respond to those things. And so all that we say is, we talked about the S curve before, we start talking about kind of flatten that thing out and not having those triple S curves. Think about where you are, think about where you want to go, do your research planning, do your design work, do your piloting, figure out your analysis and your design enhancements, and you can bypass that scaling trap as you go forward and stop wasting time. So with that, just open up to any questions that you may have or comments. I'm out of breath. Any comments, questions online in the house? Yes. Yeah. So we're finding a lot of our smaller, and by smaller, I mean 25 buses or less. They're willing to take on a couple more buses here and there to fit their facilities. But the larger ones will take on some, but not a lot. They're just already tapped out for space like everyone else is. So, I mean, that's all relative. I understand that, but it's all tolerance. So we have clients that'll say, I'll take one bus swap, and they'll do a 1.25 on a battery electric bus swap of 1.2 electric vehicles for every one diesel vehicle as it goes out, or CNG vehicle goes out. They'll take that on as a responsibility. And I think the plan is they're hoping by the time they get to those really difficult routes of transition, they won't have the 2.2, they'll just stay that. Most everyone is saying, I want to go with depot only to get started. I'll take on some on route as it's advantageous for me to do it right now. Because if I can keep all my assets at home and control everything at home, it's easier for me to maintain and overview and protect and security and maintenance and those kinds of things. Because cybersecurity is a whole other issue that's coming up right now with on-route charging. So, but they're all different. That's what keeps me in business, right? It's nice. Any other questions? Comments? All righty. Well, thank you very much. If you need something, I'll be around all day.